Before we get started with today's podcast, we'd like to ask returning listeners to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform, iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you really enjoy it, share a link to this podcast with friends or family who would enjoy hearing our weekly discussions about basketball and basketball culture. Now, on to the show.
Jim, isn't it amazing when Michigan can keep this game to a 19-foot, 9-inch game inside that three-point line? It's all there. Nice move by Steve Fisher here. Turn it into the 19-9 game.
Welcome to the 19-9 podcast. I'm here with Jason Andreas, back for a second time, and the Chucker. We are going to get into some AAU basketball today. But before we get started, I just wanted to check in with everybody. I'll start with Jason. How's everything going there in Michigan?
Hey, Aaron. Hey, Chucker. Good, man. Everything is good. The sun is shining. The weather's getting a little bit warmer. We're getting outside a little bit more. So very happy over here, and some rumblings of sports coming back. So I'm very happy about that.
Yeah, I forget in Michigan, summer's actually probably just starting right now. For the rest of us, we maybe had a month already.
We got about a 3-week window of summer that we work with each year.
No doubt. You better
we come out full force when it's here.
Full force. Tank tops at the ready.
Tank tops, short shorts. Let's go. Mow the lawn every day, whatever I got to do to get outside.
Chucker, how's it going there in Illinois?
Well, in the Chicago area, we just had a big storm pass through, but that's all right. It's kind of trapped us inside a little bit here, but we are done with remote schooling. So that's a good thing in the Chuckers household.
That's a bonus, especially with kids, huh?
No kidding, man.
Their summer has started.
Really took a bite out of modern life here in the Chuckers household.
Oh my God, I bet. So I wanted to see, let's start out with just a few quick hitter questions before we get into our main topic today, just talking about AAU or summer ball. How you guys feeling about the NBA bubble? I think I go back and forth between optimistic and pessimistic. I think I'm a little pessimistic this week. I'm not sure if it's going to actually happen with how things are going down there.
I would say I'm the exact same as you. I would say cautiously optimistic is how I approach most things in life.
Yeah.
But it goes back and forth each week. At first, great, it's coming back. I can't wait. Then you start seeing some of the rules and some of the kind of the wearable devices that they're going to be rocking. And
I want one of those rings though.
And I do too. Why can't we get all? I feel like everyone should get one of those.
No kidding.
Right? It seems like it's the future.
The next stimulus check.
I think like yesterday you see like Nikola Jokic testing positive, a couple guys from
I didn't see that even.
The Jazz testing positive. Yeah. And it's like, you start to think like, again, I love sports to come back, but what happens if you're, halfway through this bubble and LeBron God forbid, test positive? Is he all of a sudden sitting out and now you've got the Lakers missing their superstar or even there's been a couple of guys I've read over the past day or two who have mentioned that they're potentially planning on opting out, not playing. And so it's great to have the possibility of the NBA back, but at the same time, what's it going to look like? Is it truly a season or a wrap to the season if there's guys that aren't showing up or guys that are going to be having to be quarantined or not playing based on what their health risk looks like. So back and forth. I wouldn't say I wouldn't watch it by any means, but we'll see. Maybe a little too early to tell. I think we'll have to kind of watch along as long as it proceeds and see how it turns out.
It's coming up against reality, huh?
It really is. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, from the Chuckers perspective, so I'm unfortunately no drama here. I'm with you guys. I've been oscillating between this like optimism and pessimism, and that pendulum is constantly swinging for me. I know. And, you see some Trevor Ariza, Avery Bradley have already come out saying they're not going to the bubble for very kind of, reasonable reasons, in both cases, family concerns. So very justifiable things. And, you just wonder about how this is going to progress forward. You see some other sports who are trying to get underway. A lot of positive tests in baseball. We've had it influence golf. So it's just really curious about, all this effort that's going in to get it off the ground and just how's it going to work? Is it going to work? I think that's a real kind of curious question.
Is it worth it? Or, as hard as it is to stomach the concept, does it make more sense to just cancel it and say, listen, we're in, unprecedented times, as you hear in pretty much every commercial that comes out these days. But that's really the fact. Does it make more sense to just say, hey, listen, we get people want sports. They want a distraction from of what's going on around the world. But at the same time, does it make more sense to just cancel and say, listen, we'll go back to the drawing board. We'll call it quits this year and come back, just as strong next year with some measures in place. I don't know. Again, time will tell. We're not.
I just worry if they can't make this work.
Watch.
If they can't make this work, how do they make next season work? They're already limiting it somewhat, and they're going down to Orlando. What are they going to do next year then?
With 30 and with the number of NBA cities, with dozens of NBA cities. It's a great question. How this progresses forward. We're already seeing coronavirus numbers spike. There's obviously a lot of talk about second waves and things like that. I mean, it's going to be a long road here with this.
What about college sports? I want to hear about college sports. Man. Yeah. What do you think about, Chucker? What do you think about college sports then? So the NBA is running into these difficulties. We've seen a lot of guys testing positive in college sports. Is there any way that college sports can come back? And I know they're going to try and come back, but can they stay back?
So some insider information I have is, I think you've seen the National High School Federation. So to take it down to another level, they've put out some information about kind of low risk and high risk sport. So like, for example, cross country being a low risk sport, and then football being a high risk sport. It's going to be really curious to see how this does unfold. I'm not convinced colleges are even going to be, students are going to be on campus come the fall, at least as we have historically known it. And if that's the case, I think it's hard to have the student athletes on campus too. And we've already seen obviously range of tests, some test data or some testing results have leaked out from LSU and Florida and Texas with some really surprising numbers. Well, actually not all that surprising, I guess, when you have so many people together. So I'm not convinced college sports is going to be around in the fall as we know it. I think things could perhaps settle down by the winter. But, it's interesting about how this coronavirus, this is really putting a pretty strong blow to college athletics as a whole, and just kind of that system. You've already seen a number of universities cut programs from Akron to Brown, Division two and three schools. So it's happening a lot. I'm really curious about, if this is like a Jenga tower and, the coronavirus being that kind of last peg that's being pulled out, and if things are going to fall down. So it's just curious times. I don't think we're going back to the way things were in terms of college sports for a while, if ever.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, and the thing too, as Chucker was saying, the reports coming out early from some of the football teams who have been back, some of the other athletes that have been back on campus is man, it's concerning, right? And the fact of the matter is these athletes, let alone just the students that come back in the fall or potentially come back in the fall, no matter what you do, you're in very, very close quarters, multiple hours a day, nearly year round, right? A lot of the student athletes, are up there all summer. You're staying in dorm rooms, which are, 10 by 10, 12 by 12. You're in the weight room. You're in the training facilities.
Talk about a bubble.
Breakfast, lunch, and dinner together. Exactly. And again, the NBA is doing it on purpose. They're purposely putting people in a bubble,
right,
to be able to contain things. But multiply that's just happening in Orlando with X amount of teams. Multiply that times all these different universities.
You're going out, and if you're a college athlete, you're going outside of your bubble too, right? You're not staying just with the guys.
You can't tell a 19-year-old not to go out and grab some dinner.
Yeah,
go out and see what's going on in the college town they live in, right? It's you're not quarantining them in their rooms as hard as you try. I mean, you might have some rules in place. But boy, it seems like, again, based on some of the early testing and some of the early findings, it's going to be really tough to negate what's going on here. So I don't know. Again, cautiously optimistic, but it's regardless of what happens, it's going to be an uphill battle, at least for the time being.
Well, before we get into the main topic, I've got let's end this section on an upbeat. I want you guys to share your best sports moment lately. I'll lead off and give you guys a chance to think about it. I've been listening to the Jack McCallum has a podcast called The Dream Team Tapes. He's got all this like raw audio that he took when he was writing the book. about the dream team, and he tells just an amazing story that made me laugh out loud while I was driving the other day. He went golfing, and it's him, another reporter, Clyde Drexler, and Charles Barkley, and they're driving on this road in Monaco, and it's this crazy windy road where Princess Grace died, and they start joking about driving off the cliff and what the newspaper would say the day after. And they first said it would read Drexler, Barkley, and 2 others die in a crash. And then the other reporter in the car says it wouldn't even put us in there. It'd just say Drexler and Barkley die in crash. And then Barkley chimes in and said, shit, it would just read Barkley dead. And I died.
I love
Barkley. So you could just hear his voice, right? Just saying that. Oh, he kills me. What about you guys? What's a sports moment you guys have had lately? A positive one?
Boy, I'll go ahead and jump in. There hasn't been a ton, to be honest with you. You know, we talked last time about the Last Dance documentary. That was fantastic, and I'll put that as a top sports moment. But for me, tugging at the heartstrings here, I've got a 5 and a 7-year-old daughter. We've, with all of the time home and school being done, or at least homeschooling being done. We've been spending a little time outside playing kickball, nice, shooting some hoops, all that good stuff. So
that
for
definitely
me
counts.
as a dad, boy, that's it's hard to beat that. So we've just been trying to connect on a family level and really enjoying those moments. My front lawn, I'm looking out the window right now, is littered with toys and baseballs and basketballs and all sorts of stuff. So we'll put that in the sports bucket. That's been my highlight recently. It's just kind of connecting with my daughters and having a fun time with them.
I love that.
Gotcha. Yeah. Here in the Chuckers world, so I'd say coming off of The Last Dance, I was really interested in the Lance Armstrong documentary too, which I don't know if any of you guys caught, but it's this fascinating thing of such a flawed human being who also did some really great things with the Livestrong Foundation. And I thought it was, particularly in these times, a very powerful reminder about sometimes things just aren't black and white.
Right.
And through the lens of arguably one of the most iconic athletes of the last, 25 years, or certainly of our generation. You have guys obviously like Jordan, and you have Tiger Woods, and Lance Armstrong for a while was in that upper echelon. And his story is just always been pretty fascinated by that, from the cancer side to how he treated people in the sport, and a very dirty sport of cycling that obviously has come out. So I thought that was a really compelling documentary. In some ways, as much as I love The Last Dance, I almost thought the Lance one was even more so. Because again, I just think just on an analytical level, it was just so interesting to see, again, how just the gray areas. Is this guy a good guy or a bad guy? And even after watching it, I don't know. I don't know what Lance is. And it was a pretty fascinating look into that.
Pulled you in, though.
I appreciated that a lot.
Yeah. AZIP Pizza is a build-your-own pizza place in Indiana and Kentucky. They have unique pizzas each month, like Love It Elote, with street corn, sauce, crispy chorizo, cilantro, and a lime wedge. They also have a ton of ingredients you can choose from to create something delicious on your own. Order online for curbside delivery at azippizza.com/order. So let's get to the main topic. I'm going to throw it to you, Chucker, to get us started talking about AAU or summer ball here, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, gotcha. So I was really curious, and I think we've talked about this before, this AAU kind of thing, and how things have changed and how that world has evolved. We've talked about it, Aaron and I, on the Class of 1985 podcast, how, ranking top high school prospects when there wasn't as robust an AAU circuit, just how much of a crapshoot that was. I think it's a natural place to kind of push off, well, where are we today with the AAU circuit? And so I think, Jason, you're a guy who played on the AAU circuit and, went far beyond your Sugar Creek, Ohio comforts and saw this AAU circuit up close. So I was really curious to get your perspective on some obviously champion AAU as a vehicle that helps young talent kind of develop their skills. They're playing against other strong talent while also providing heightened exposure to college programs. and others view it as, almost like the devil, like it's an exploit, just a real mess. So I'm curious about where you think the truth lies from your perspective. What do you kind of see as the pros and cons, the benefits, the drawbacks of AAU basketball, and where and kind of how it feeds, the upper levels and kind of just its place in American society even?
That's a great question, guys. I love this topic, and I think the truth probably lies somewhere kind of smack in the middle of good and bad. And let me caveat everything that I kind of will talk about. My experiences come from the mid to late 90s. So just from a time perspective, that sounds really long ago when I say it that way. Last century when I played. The reason that I kind of classify that time frame, just to give you a moment in time, also though, is that AAU has evolved a lot from. It's been around. The organization has been around for 100+ years. But what we're talking about is a time range in the mid to late 90s when things really started to evolve, when shoot contracts and recruitment and exposure, the internet, YouTube, all of these things were starting to kind of develop to give players exposure. And even my AAU journey really progressed from the first year that I played, maybe as an 8th grader, to my senior year. We'll talk about some of the teams that I played on and what that looked like, going from a very small town to a very large program that was playing all over the world. So definitely goods and bads. For me in particular, coming from Sugar Creek, Ohio, which is a 2 stoplight town, one proper stoplight and one flashing red light.
You can't count. You can't count the flashing one.
The flashing one.
That's a glorified stop sign.
We do have a McDonald's. Yeah.
All right.
We'll say one stoplight and a McDonald's.
Okay.
So that's not bad. But for me, the biggest pro was exposure. Right. This is a small town, maybe 2,000 people. Middle of cornfields, middle of Ohio, being able to play first with a local team, then a larger team, then playing with an all Ohio team, then playing with a national team, as I progressed throughout, junior high and high school was fantastic. Nowadays, you got the internet, you got YouTube, kids, doesn't matter where they play. You could play in some obscure country in Eastern Europe. Like, they're going to get their highlights out there and people might hear about them. Whereas it wasn't quite the same in 1995, 1996. So for me, being able to get out there and play in some of these tournaments, even locally, was a really good blessing for me to get kind of my exposure and really start to kind of roll down that path. And then again, build from one team to the next. The other positive, camaraderie, friendships, you being in a small town, I had a good group of friends, guys that are still buddies to this day, but also getting a chance to play with other guys who were just so passionate about basketball. Ultimately, when I played at some of the higher levels of AAU, these were guys that were, some of them joined me as teammates at Michigan State. Guys, when I'm playing, against UCLA and Arizona and some of these big schools, guys, I know half the guys I've played either against them or with them on my AAU teams. And it really kind of builds kind of that ecosystem, that bubble of basketball, which is really awesome too. Boy, there's some bads too, for sure. When I was,
I want to stop you real quick. So one of the things that Chucker and I have talked a bunch about is the change that camaraderie has had in the next levels. I mean, you hear it a lot. Do you see? Did it affect the competitiveness? Because I go back and forth, thinking about whether that would, really plays into it. Because maybe for some people, but I think I don't know. I'm curious to hear what how you felt going on then and playing against some of those guys later on after you develop that relationship with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be hard to argue that it doesn't resonate beyond high school. But again, both in a good and bad way. I don't think it's a bad thing to get to know folks outside of your town or city or village in my source. So there's some impact that's felt all the way up even to like the NBA level, right? Look at some of the guys these days, like they've been playing together. You look at some of the guys like LeBron and Dwayne Wade's son playing, high school and AAU ball together. Like, is that a bad thing? Not necessarily. It's really interesting to watch them play, and they'll probably be friends for life, and they'll probably both play in the NBA against one another. So there's some really interesting, again, teamwork, camaraderie, friendships that are built out of something like that. But the argument on the other side of that is, go back to the 80s, the heyday of the NBA, guys, fist fighting on the court, those really hated rivalries between the Lakers and the Pistons and the Bulls and Knicks and all of that. these guys weren't friends. They didn't know each other. They never met each other. And that really led to some of those really great rivalries we saw. I reached out to a couple of the guys that I played with in college in particular and asked them a little bit about their AAU teams just as a lead up to this. I talked to Mateen Cleaves, obviously, All-American, played in the NBA for a long time, straight out of Flint, Michigan. I was asking him, and I got into a really interesting conversation I thought you guys would appreciate. There's a lot of really great AAU teams based out of Michigan, the Michigan Mustangs, the Family out of Southfield. These are huge AAU programs that, Draymond Green and Miles Bridges and Charlie Bell and all these guys played for. Mateen played for a team called the Flint Jays, J''S.
Oh boy.
He said it was about as terrible as it sounds. No shoe deals, crappy uniforms from East Bay, I think maybe in the early days.
Oh yes.
But what he said about it was he loved it. Everyone on that team was from the city of Flint. No one from outside the city of Flint, not even the suburbs of Flint, straight up from Flint. There was pride associated with it. It was more of like this gritty city versus city feel. Versus, nowadays, again, you got guys flying across the country to play on AAU teams or traveling 4 or 5 hours by car to go play and for a team in Chicago when they're from, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And I think that dilutes some of what AAU originally was allowing exposure, allowing kind of more of that town versus town, city versus city. And now it's really kind of smudged those lines to just kind of be who can load up the biggest team with the biggest players and get the biggest shoe contracts and all of those things.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I doing a little research on my own about it. I think that you're hitting it right on the head where really the exposure now comes only with the shoe leagues. I mean, I don't even know. AAU again is that kind of term to talk about summer basketball, but Nike, EYBL, and those things that were, I think, starting when you were in it, and I was in kind of a different tier, different same time frame, but just a different tier where I had to go try out for a team. I'll never forget the first tryout that I went to for this AAU team, and we traveled to the state actual AAU tournament and went to a few Chicago tournaments. And who knows, I might have even played against one of your teams. Probably my best story is one of the first tournaments we went to in Chicago. And this hits to your point about exposure and seeing different things. We're warming up on one end of the court, and we're feeling pretty good. I look down there, and the team looks good, but doable. And then we realized that was the under 13 team, and I'm 16 at the time. And they bring the under 16 team over. Everyone is probably your height, 6'10", just throwing down dunks, crazy dunks in the warm ups, and suddenly just hit where I was like, the D1 ship sailed for me on that day. I knew I was going to be a good player, and we gave him a battle as best we could. But it really opened your eyes to just the levels of basketball, and you can see why they maybe created some of these leagues to get that select talent and push some of those players even further, and then to put coaches. I'm sure coaches want it too, as much as the shoe guys have their own agenda. Coaches benefit too from having all these guys gathered together on one circuit where they can watch them all together rather than trying to get to these teams in far-flung reaches of the country. I mean, most college programs don't have the budgets that the Blue Bloods have, so that they're really benefited by being able to see all these guys, because if they don't get offered by a Blue Blood, they might be able to see that guy and talk to him or offer him.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting, you made a couple of really great points there, is, one of the biggest negatives that I think is that although it's regulated and it's the AAU, the Amateur Athletic Union, and has been for such a long time, I still feel that there's a large lack of regulation. There's still some pretty poor structure to the AAU process.
Yeah.
And, when I was younger, I loved it, right? You'd hop in a van with a 15-seat van with all your buddies, and it would smell terrible. You hit Taco Bell up and you'd go play 5 games. And that was great. But at the same time, that's not the ideal way to learn basketball when you're 14, 15, 16 years old. But that's also the doing of some of the regulations that's in place, where high school coaches, even up into college coaches, there's a limitation of how much exposure they can have with their players throughout the summertime and off season. again, depending on how you look at it, what side of the fence you're on, that could be good or bad. I'm more on the side of the fence that I think well-rounded student athletes are best.
Sorry, guys.
I think one of the issues on the bad side of AAU is kind of the regulation or lack of regulation. Despite being overseen by the amateur athletic union, AAU in general, there's still a fairly poor structure to everything, right? And sometimes that's good or bad, depending on what side of the fence you're sitting on, right? Like for kids, I remember loving, hopping in a van, driving, 3-4 hours and playing 4 or 5 games a day. But you also, as a 14, 15, 16-year-old, that's not the best way to learn fundamentals, right? Sometimes you don't have great coaching, right? So coaches could be anybody who are kind of put in place just to kind of manage the team versus actually teaching them actual skills of basketball. And you also have the ability, there's not a whole lot of commitment to one or other AAU team, right? You can, if you don't like the team, you don't like the coach, you just change to a different team, right? I saw that happen all the time.
I bet.
Where even our team, as we were getting larger, we would go, head into the gym early, maybe stay after. And if we saw a guy in another team we liked, we might, our coach might stop over and say, hey, listen, if you're interested in joining another team, we got a spot for you, right? And there's some sleaziness to that. But again, I think what has led to that is sometimes the overregulation of maybe like high school basketball, right? So you've got, the High School Basketball Association in this case saying there's limitations that are being placed upon, sports programs that, coaches can't spend time with their players in the summer. They're limited to how much time they can spend. And so that's where AAU kind of came about is, okay, we can, it's great. These kids can play sports and work on their game in the summertime. But again, you lose some of that regulation. I think initially that was great for high school teams. And then eventually they're like, well, maybe it's not so great because some folks excel in an AAU setting, a summer ball setting, some don't necessarily. So again, there's a couple different ways to look at it. There's some goods and bads. I was thinking, for me, again, the exposure was great, but this kind of summer league, the way that it's developed now isn't necessarily great for everyone. Is it good for guards? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is it good for guys who can score? Absolutely. Is it good for post players, back to the basket post players like me?
You better be checking threes.
Yeah. I better be able to get the rebound and go
yeah.
if I want to
get working on that outlet pass.
Yeah, pick and roll maybe once or twice a game. Is it a defensive first strategy when you're playing AAU ball? Absolutely not. And that was kind of me. I was a post player, I was a rebounder, I was a defensive player. And again, I looking back in hindsight, my experience playing AAU was good and valuable, and I probably would not have ended up where I was without it. But at the same time, it was not necessarily a breeding ground for post players or fundamental based players as well. The opposite side of that is you've got a platform of like the club system that they use in Europe, and that's really excelling right now. They only focus on fundamentals.
Yeah.
And you see guys my size coming out of there in my age back in the late 90s, early 2000s, coming out of the European club programs. They can shoot threes like Steph Curry. They can handle the ball like LeBron does, right? Like, and they're really teaching fundamentals across the board versus who can, get the most dunks and score the most points for YouTube highlights. So there's a diversion of again, the process and a diversion of the regulation of AAU versus maybe some of the more fundamental based platforms that would probably be more ideal for kids of that age, if that makes sense.
I think so. It's interesting to hear you talking about it. I'm curious. I want to ask you in a second about the how you chose your teams, and then we can get into maybe some of the teams that you played for. Because for me, the experience of AAU was also kind of freeing because our high school had a ton of guards, and we were kind of slotted into very specific positions, and it seemed like the coaches made a bit of a decision about who you were going to be almost immediately upon making the varsity, and they had some guys who were more talented, so that makes sense, especially fitting within a system that the coaches were playing. But the AAU coaches, it was a more kind of up and down style. The team that I played for, the composition was totally different than my high school team, so it gave me a chance to do things that I wouldn't have been able to do had I not played on that team. So I'm curious kind of to hear about some of the teams that you're on, if any of that went in, since you had more choice in where you were playing, like if you thought about how do I fit on this team, kind of like maybe you did choosing Michigan State or something like that.
Yeah, it's a good question. Again, that's the other side of the fence, right? So my AAU experience was definitely a journey. I alluded to this earlier. The first team that I joined, I think it was called Dover AAU, which was based in Dover, Ohio, which was like the next largest town over from Sugar Creek. We were a town of about 2,000. I think Dover has maybe like 20,000 people, maybe 25,000. So a little bit bigger.
Shout out to
D1
20,000. Yeah.
Shout out to the Dover Tornadoes.
Yeah.
So, I remember just getting a call one day and they're like, "Hey, do you want to come play for the Dover AAU team?" I was like, "Yeah, sure. That sounds like fun." I couldn't get enough basketball at the time. When I got there, it's like, all right, do your thing, right? Like in my high school program, we were very regimented.
Mm-hmm.
We ran the flex offense, right? We had sets.
Gosh.
And yeah, so it was like, all right, what do you want to do? You prefer picking and popping, picking and rolling? How good are you at shooting the 15-footer, the three? What's your strength? And you could kind of create what you wanted to. And of course, every big guy wants to play point guard. And so I'm like, yeah, I'll do anything, right? And so you do have some of that exposure that you might not get with a paid head coach in a high school program who's trying to win games and keep his job in AAU basketball. It's like, hey, let's put up some points. Let's win some games. Let's, make a name in some of these tournaments. So, yeah, I think they do let you, kind of recreate who you are as a basketball player. So I think that's a really interesting concept. And yeah, definitely saw that.
You can make a name by dunking on someone as much as winning a game, right?
Exactly. But it also varies depending on the team.
Sure.
On the Dover AAU team, I was probably the best player. And so the offense and defense would usually run through me. I scored, I don't know, 20 points, 25, 30 points a game, whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, just put the ball up, score as much as you can. From there, the next season I went on to like more of like a county team. It was called Team Start County, based out of Canton, Ohio, where the Pro Football Hall of Fame is. Much bigger, pulling in a lot of D1 kids, a lot of city kids. And now I become, still a good player, but I'm playing with kids from Division I schools where I'm coming from, like a Division III school. So these guys.
And are you
bigger,
starting in
stronger, more
like,
athletic.
is this in like high school? How old are you at this time?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like eighth grade, ninth grade, probably.
Yeah.
You're starting to play with guys that are getting a little bit more exposure, guys who again are playing for, big D1 schools all around Ohio, or at least in that region.
Yeah.
I played with a kid there. His name was Keith McLeod. He went on to play at Bowling Green. Then he played in the NBA for, I don't know, at least 7 or 8 seasons.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're starting to see from that local team to now a county-based team, a little bit more talent, a little more athleticism. We started playing in larger tournaments. And again, depending on if you're playing in little local tournaments, yeah, I could shoot threes all day. I could, get a rebound and take it coast to coast, no problem. It was fun. We had a good time, and we usually beat every team by a pretty significant margin. Now you're playing bigger, stronger teams. Now I'm starting to relinquish myself. Like, I probably should play in the post a little bit more, because now instead of guarding a 6'3" guy, I'm guarding a 6'8" guy, right? It's kind of like what you were talking about in your tournament in Chicago.
Yeah.
Now you're starting to level the playing field, and instead of me being out shooting threes, maybe I need to be inside guarding this guy, doing a little post-up work to free up some of my more talented players.
Or you look at the other end and it's my team on there, and you got me guarding.
Maybe that's right. From there, so there was kind of like the county team in Canton. I went on and I played for a team called the Columbus Basketball Club for a very short amount of time. Based in Columbus, they had guys from all over the state. That was kind of like the marquee Ohio AAU program at the time. And again, average height probably 6'7", 6'8". Again, we're probably 14, 15 years old, 16 years old, maybe. So that's a pretty big set of guys.
That's a big group.
Well, that team, I played with a guy named Adam Wolf out of Westerville, Ohio. He actually ended up being my teammate and classmate at Michigan State. So now you're starting to see where this all meshes together, where I didn't know Adam at all. All of a sudden I'm playing with him. He's basically a mirror image of me. He's a 6'9" guy. We look pretty similar, and we became friends pretty quickly on that team and stayed in close contact for the next couple of years. Ended up going to Michigan State together, and I just had dinner with him on Friday night. He lives up here in the Detroit area. So,
nice.
Without that AAU program, who knows what would have happened toughen our friendship. So really kind of developing that concept. So I played with that team for a little while. We did some of the more regional, tours there. We were in Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Chicago, Pittsburgh, Detroit, playing some of those big regional AAU tournaments. And then from there, I got picked going into between my sophomore and junior year. I got selected to be on this team, AAU team based out of Los Angeles.
Oh, wow.
Called Team Reebok. Now, again, you're starting to
So you got a shoe company attached to it already, so you can kind of see something.
From Dover AAU, we had these junky reversible mesh jerseys.
Not the East Bay catalog anymore.
Yeah, not even East Bay. I think this was like the local sporting goods shop, and now,
oh god,
we're on Team Reebok, and yeah, boy, we got just absolutely fitted out in gear. That team was fantastic. So, within 18 months or so, I went from a little local AAU team, which I loved as well, to playing both nationally, and we actually went international when I played on Team Reebok, and that team was absolutely stacked with both college and NBA talent. So it's interesting, and yeah, that with Team Reebok comes 4 or 5 pairs of shoes, travel bags, travel suits, 2 or 3 different uniform combos. I think we were red, white, and blue, so we had a red, white, and blue uniform. So 3 different uniform types, hats, flip-flops, swim trunks, like stuff you didn't even need. But man, why not? Like this is where you start to get in that convergence of the shoe companies and AAU, and they're trying to get
now they're reeling you in, right? They're like, oh,
I love Reebok.
Yeah,
I want to wear Reebok the rest of my life. And this was Reebok. Reebok. Not so much anymore. No offense if anyone from Reebok's listening. I still love my Reeboks, but this is when Iverson was with Reebok.
Yeah.
This is when a lot of the big programs around the country in terms of college.
The pump had
Reebok
just been out, right?
What's that?
The pump was out.
The pump. You had the answer, the question. Yeah. Michigan State at the time.
They were Reebok, right?
Coincidentally, yes. This is not.
Coincidentally, right? We're not breaking any news.
No. They were also Reebok in my first year when I went up to Michigan State. But man, yeah, they fitted us out with so much gear, and yeah, that was a big change. We were rolling into gyms as Team Reebok, and everyone's looking at us because we had, some really nice stuff going on. I feel like what we had with Team Reebok is probably what almost every AAU team has now, if not multiple times better. But at least at that time in the late 90s, we thought we were pretty big with all of that stuff. And they all of our tournament entry, all of that stuff was definitely taken care of. So we started playing now in, the big time tournament out in Las Vegas. We were in Los Angeles. We were in Orlando. At the end of the summer, we actually did an international trip. We flew over to France and Belgium and played against pro teams. I think I was 6. I just turned 16.
That's wild.
It's pretty intense for a 15 or 16-year-old kid from Sugar Creek, Ohio. But you see how quickly that developed for me from that local team to my first time playing, traveling abroad, playing in against grown men in France and Belgium. 12, 18, 24 months later.
How'd the coaching change as you moved up the ladder then too?
If anyone ever listens to this that was on Dover AAU, Team Stark County, Columbus Basketball Club, my coaches were all great. Actually, all of them, at least in my scenarios, were high school basketball coaches.
Okay.
Who were spending time in the summer,
moonlighting,
just making sure they stayed fresh, moonlighting. Yeah. And so all my coaches were excellent. Obviously, the way they coached, the style of coaching was a little different. When you're Dover AAU team, it was more fundamental based. Like, let's just help these kids, stay out of trouble in the summertime, work on some skills so they can go back to their respective high school programs next summer and be a little bit better. To, Team Reebok, these are all future Division I NBA guys. It was more, put them on the court, get out of the way, and let them play basketball. So a little less coaching at that level, a little bit more management of egos in the team and things of that nature.
What? So, go ahead, Chucker.
So I was going to ask you about that process, Jason, of going from a kid from Sugar Creek, Ohio, landing on an AAU team in Los Angeles. How did that actually come about?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first 3 steps in my AAU journey make a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
So from
you went from
Dover,
like a local team
yeah,
to a more regional team to a state team. It makes
yeah,
complete sense,
makes total sense. Yeah, the connection here was when I was playing for the Columbus Basketball Club. They were based just outside of Columbus, Ohio. Had a nice little home gym, all of that. One of the guys who was a kind of a sponsor, I suppose, of the Columbus Basketball Club. It was a guy by the name of Bobby Courtson. I'm sure you could probably Google his name, but he was pretty big into the AAU circuit, and he had gotten in with Team Reebok as well. And they wanted a couple guys from around the country to join this. Even though this Team Reebok was based in Los Angeles, it was very much a national team. So they were trying to pick and choose guys from all around the country. I can give you a quick rundown of what that team, what the lineup looked like here in just a second. But most of the guys, there was probably 3 or 4 guys that were actually from Los Angeles, but there were guys from all over. We had South Dakota, we had Ohio, we had Atlanta, Georgia. We had folks from all over. So I think they were trying to diversify the group. They wanted more of a national team, and they were looking for not just the top 15 guys, number 1 through number 15. They were looking for guys who could actually build a team, play together. Some guys who actually played defense and rebounded, like myself. I think I was probably recruited more to be that workhorse kind of guy. And I'm sure they saw me playing for Columbus Basketball Club. I think Bobby Courtson, the guy who helped put the Reebok team together, liked my style of play and thought I'd be a good fit to some of the more athletic, more kind of flashy guys. And I think that's really how the process worked out, at least from what I can remember.
And so who were some of the guys you mentioned? You talk about that lineup. Who were some of the guys on that team?
Yeah. So along with myself, kind of on the lower end of the side, we had Keith Bogans, who ended up, he was from DeMatha, went to DeMatha High School in near Washington, D.C., and ended up at Kentucky, and then played in the NBA for gobs of years.
Yeah, probably about a dozen years or so, definitely.
At least, yeah. Mike Miller from South Dakota.
Well, you said South Dakota. I think that's the only professional basketball player South Dakota's ever produced.
That was my hint. Yeah, he ended up going to Florida Gators, and then he won an NBA championship with the Heat. Still in touch with him. He's doing some coaching for Memphis, University of Memphis, and doing some interesting things there. He was fantastic. Interestingly enough, again, talking about the camaraderie and getting to know guys. So we played with, I played with Mike in high school, and then my very first year at Michigan State, we played Florida in the national championship game. So I get to see Mike, a few years later, 2 years later, and we're actually competing against each other. We had a guy named Jason Capono, ended up going to UCLA, played for
shooter.
Several years at UCLA. Great shooter. Played for many years in the league as well. A guy named Dan Gadzurek also went to UCLA. Rick Anderson from LA, Long Beach, went to Arizona. Britton Johnson went to Utah. Donald Little went to Cincinnati. Very interestingly, a guy named Josh Kroenke, his father, Stan Kroenke.
Yeah, he's an owner, right?
So Stan was rolling around with us during our AAU tournaments. Yeah, Stan owns the Rams and the Avalanche and the Nuggets, and he's one of the richest sports owners in the world. So his son Josh, who played at Missouri, was on our team as well. A very interesting dynamic there.
Is he the one that doesn't one of the sons run the Nuggets now?
So Josh, he's like the head player personnel or something like that. Last I checked, but he's up there within the Nuggets organization. Okay. Interesting. I was telling you earlier when we went on this trip to France and Belgium, this was my first time out of the country. And again, I think I had just turned 16 years old, and we're hopping on a big jumbo jet flying into Brussels or I think we flew into Paris actually, and I remember Josh and his dad took the Concorde. And I was
gosh, get out!
What's up with this? Why can't we take the Concorde? Little different style. But
that's classic.
They met. We were on the road for 22 hours. For connections in New York, and they took
we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
Good choice. Yeah, that's a good choice.
Yeah. So that team was stacked. And again, if you look back, even a lot of those guys, like Mike Miller originally was playing for this team out of South Dakota. I think they were called the Dakota Schoolers or something like that, some corny name. But he originally was playing with them, and we went out to play in the big time tournament in Las Vegas, which was the marquee tournament, at least back in the day. And I think, as I was alluding to earlier, I think our coaches just approached him as like, hey, you want to join our team? And, next thing I know, we were going to Los Angeles to play in a tournament. And there he was.
Just showed up. Huh?
We're overseas in France and Belgium, and he's playing with us too. And that's it. I think it's just, that these guys are very easily and freely moved between teams. Again, good and bad, I suppose, but it helped us take some of those guys who were, playing on other teams initially and then moving them over to our team to kind of stack up that talent.
Yeah, you almost need the shoe money if you're gonna take it to those heights because of the cost of doing business. To get a team to overseas. I remember we played in a tournament in Las Vegas and we took a motorhome out there. just to get a group of guys out there. You said in your early days taking the 15 passenger van to move people around, and that's for the adults involved. Boy, that's a real hurdle for them to climb over to take a team of adolescent boys to Florida or Las Vegas. They got to be saints to do that.
Yeah. And again, that's, you're looking at the good side and the bad side. When I talk to some of my buddies about AAU basketball, I think we kind of longingly remember the days of piling in those vans and going and spending all day in some gym somewhere and playing hoops. Like that's the core of basketball, right?
Yeah.
Like, I probably started to get a little sense of it with Team Reebok, where you start to see these big sponsorships and flying around the country, if not flying abroad. And it was it fun as a 16-year-old? Absolutely. It was fantastic. I had an absolute blast, but you kind of yearn for the simpler days too, where it was more about the basketball and less about the flashiness and all of that stuff as well, if that makes sense.
Definitely.
Did you feel more pressure being on that LA team in the sense that they had the capacity to maybe go pull a guy off of a good team? Like they approached Mike Miller, hey, you want to come play for us? Did you feel pressure that you could almost be like relieved of your duties at any point?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question.
Take your Reeboks back.
Presumably means someone else might go away.
Yeah. I don't think I can recall us kind of leaving one player off as the season progressed. I can't remember what the guy's name was, but he was also out of Georgia. But he was with us for a while, and then all of a sudden he wasn't. I don't remember why it was, but maybe that's the exact reason. Maybe there's like, hey, listen, we got somebody better. Go ahead and stay home the next tournament. Or maybe he had to be home for some reason. I don't recall, but now that you say that, I'm thinking back. I wonder if that's what happened. For me personally, yeah, I at the beginning of that summer, I remember quite distinctly. I was playing quite a bit, and I was in kind of the core rotation of this group of guys. Again, there's probably on any given tournament 12 to 15 of us, and I was getting a good amount of playing time. And then we picked up this guy by the name of Dan Gadzurek, who again
was a top recruit out of high school.
He was huge. Yeah, this guy's a big Dutch guy. He's massive. He played at UCLA, played for the Bucks for countless years, and all of a sudden my playing time diminished. Not completely. I was still playing quite a bit, but he went to the starting five, and then I was kind of coming off the bench to spell him and a few of the other guys. So yeah, it absolutely happened. But shoot, that gets you prepared for college when you might be a pretty good sophomore, and then they recruit a guy like Zach Randolph, and then you're not playing as much anymore at Michigan State. So it's life, and that's the way things work. And that was kind of a microcosm of what the rest of kind of basketball becomes for you as well. You're not guaranteed a spot, and there's certainly pressure to play hard.
What were some of the best battles that you remember from the core? Because I think that's the fun thing. Even too at the lower level, you can find if you're playing those local teams like rivals or little even different mix-ups from high school teams, and you get kind of these little rivalries. So I'm curious if you had any rivalries, and then what are some of your best battles that you can remember?
I don't I don't really recall any rivalries. I love rivalries. That's one of my reasons I love college basketball or college sports, I guess, in general. But with AAU, I mean, there's just you're playing so many games in such a short amount of time. It's maybe today there might be more rivalries, but for us, it was just you go, you play. Who cares who's on the other team? And you might know the guys, you might not. But you're just trying to win and have a good time and save yourself so you can get through 4 or 5 games a day, sleep a
Yeah.
little bit, and then play 4 or 5 the next day, and then make it home, right? So
Right.
I don't think the rivalry, at least for me, really existed. Um, it was more about the just getting through the number of games you could and trying to win the tournament if you could. If not, just having a good time and playing basketball. I do recall. I think I mentioned to you guys before I talk. There's 1 or 2 teams I remember playing pretty distinctly. Um, but what I think is more interesting is my mom had saved pretty much everything that I've ever done, newspaper clippings, programs, things like that. My father and her would travel to some of these AAU tournaments, probably both for personal fun and the sense of like a Las Vegas tournament, but also to watch us play. And she saved a lot of the programs. And I remember I've still got some of them, and I flipped through them not too long ago. And it's interesting to see, you look back and you're like, this team Reebok versus this team. And you're like, wait a minute. Like, I played against Zach Randolph in that tournament. I didn't even know who he was. I probably guarded him. He guarded me. And then years later, we're at Michigan State together, and I had no idea until
Till you
a
looked
few
at
months ago when I saw that program. So
Yeah.
the other side of that is, sure, we played against some really great teams. I might not even have known who some of those guys were at the time. Guys who are great NBA players probably played against them and didn't know. Again, you just play such a large magnitude of games. It's hard to keep track of all of that. We played specifically in terms of maybe the best AAU team we played. We played against I remember there was a couple teams that had pretty solid kind of quote unquote brand names. The Atlanta Celtics were a big team that we played against. DC Assault was a big one. In 96, 97, we played against them, and they had DeMar Johnson, who ended up playing at Cincinnati. He was one of the top 5 players in the country that year. And I swear every AAU tournament we went to, he was always like the MVP. Keith Bogans
I remember
was on
hearing
that team.
so much
You
about.
remember DeMar?
Yeah, well, he had so much. He was one of those early hype guys, and he didn't pan. I mean, he did not have a career playing college, but it just like he had the hype machine fully going, especially from the AAU circuit. I remember just hearing his name constantly.
Yeah, he absolutely. He's one of those guys who probably peaked early. He was 6'9" and athletic, probably from the day he was like a 7th grader. And so, yeah, when you walk into a gym, all eyes were on him and whatever team he played for. And he was fantastic. And I think he was the MVP of the Las Vegas tournament that year. And I think DC Assault won it. We had lost to them in that tournament, and I think like the Final Four. So Keith Bogans was on that team. Another guy, if you guys have good short-term memory, I mentioned he was also on Team Reebok. So we politely recruited Keith away from DC Assault for the rest of the summer after that. So Keith was on DC Assault. A guy named Rodney White, who played for Charlotte, was in the league for a while. And then James White was one of the most athletic guys I think I can recall playing against. He played for Florida.
Well, it's like Flight White, the guy that
Flight White.
All right,
you got it.
Yeah,
absolutely. Boy, it's again, we were pretty good, and when I was 16 and 17 years old, I was a pretty athletic kid. But seeing guys like James White and DeMar Johnson, like just dunking over 5 or 6 guys at a time, like it is unbelievable in terms of the improvement in athleticism. So that team, that 96, 97 DC Assault team was fantastic, man. I remember playing against them.
Did you play against that KC team with the Rush brothers or any or?
Oh yeah. I know who you're talking about. I don't recall playing against them, but I remember that team very well. Like that was definitely one of the teams that was like you knew about them.
Because they had McGaddy too, I think.
Yeah, we played against another team. Just in hindsight, that we played against was the Michigan Mustangs. I mentioned them earlier.
Oh yeah.
The team we played against ended up having a couple of guys again I played college ball with, but like Jason Richardson, who's again a really good buddy of mine.
Yeah.
He was on that team. He was the ended up being the 6th pick in the NBA draft, 2-time NBA dunk champ. Kelvin Torbert, another Michigan State guy, he was actually the Gatorade High School Player of the Year in 2002, maybe. A guy by the name of Desmond Farmer, a legendary basketball player out of Michigan. Charles Rogers, Chuck Rogers, who ended up being the #1 NFL draft pick for the Lions a couple years. This guy by the name of Jeremiah McLaurin played in the NFL for the Titans, I think, for a few years. I mean, that's how talented these guys were. Like, you got future NFL #1 draft picks, you got future NBA dunk champs. They're all on the same team. And what's interesting about those guys, most of those guys were from Flint and Saginaw, Michigan, which, again, going back to what Mateen Cleaves mentioned earlier, that's more of a local team. The Michigan Mustangs were definitely a Michigan-based team playing against a team like ours. It was more national-based. So you still had a little bit of that kind of localization in some of those teams as well. But those guys were obviously, based on who I just mentioned, they were really, really good too.
Did you notice the coaches? A lot of AAU, and we hear about it, is you hear about the hangers-on or hear about coaches. The amount of coaches. Is that something that you noticed when you were playing, or were looking for, or just kind of you were there to play ball and to hoop?
That's a good question. I don't want to get myself in trouble.
And without saying too much, but I think you can talk just kind of in general. Don't have to necessarily get into specifics.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there was absolutely hangers on, especially not necesserally when I played for Dover AAU.
Right, yeah. I can attest that I did not notice them.
Days. Yeah. Again, you're talking about a bunch of high school kids, many of whom are ranked in the top 20 in their classes, if not top 5 or 10. Traveling around the country, traveling around the world. Yeah, there was absolutely folks that were around. I recall, this is, I'll mention this, but I won't go into detail. But I recall when we traveled to some of the bigger tournaments, we actually had a guy who was a pretty prominent NBA professional sports agent that just happened to always be around us and happened to be with us when we went overseas.
Oh, wow.
Probably
did he take the Concorde?
He just happened to show up wherever we were. I don't know how he got there.
Yeah. Extra seat on the Concorde, maybe.
He might have been. But I remember at least at that age being like, that's a little weird that this guy's around. And when I found out he was an agent, again, I didn't, I don't know the ins and outs and the rules of contact with high school players. It's not the same as with college players.
Right.
I think they can have contact, but it just didn't feel quite right. But again, you've got these shoe executives that are at the games coming to chat with you after the game. You got, NBA scouts, you got college scouts, you got college head coaches, you got, agents who are looking to kind of, if not, do anything illegal, but at least make sure you know who they are. So in 2 or 3 years, when you're, finish your first year of college and you're going to go into the NBA draft, like I remember that guy. He was with us when we went to France and Belgium, and maybe that gives them a leg up. But yeah, it happens 100%. Again, that was 20 some years ago. I can't even imagine now. You see some of these games on YouTube and you look in the stands and it's like NBA coaches. You see Steve Kerr sitting at the game. You see these big power agents. Like, it's probably way, way worse. Not worse, but way, way more, kind of.
It's more integrated. Yeah, it's integrated
way more.
in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. They're probably they're probably assistant coaches on the team at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you start to hear, there's a lot of stories that came out around AAU basketball in the early to mid 2000s as well, where you got an AAU coach who just suddenly, a big AAU program, he suddenly becomes an assistant coach at a big Division I college program, and then their star player, who was the #1 McDonald's All-American recruit, now goes to that school. I won't name names, but you can do the research and you probably know who I'm talking about. There's instances of that happening all the time. And again, you started to see some more regulation that came into place, but yeah, that's a classic example. You start to integrate with these kids in their AAU programs. You maybe give a little favor to that AAU coach, and next thing you know, you got the top recruit in the country. That's not the way I like to talk about things and the way that I think things should be done, but certainly it happens. You can't be ignorant to it. So,
well, I think your insight on that AAU jumping into that kind of space that high school or even colleges, they aren't allowed, they've got that kind of club system in Europe where you're attached to a club or can sign with a club. And there's just that summertime that's just a blank slate in the United States. When I was in high school, it's about the same time as you, like coaches couldn't do anything with you during the summer. They could have like open gyms, but you couldn't really organize. Now there's like you can do a little bit with the players, but it was literally like, they could give you a piece of paper with a workout on it. And that was about it.
Yeah. And, I was going to mention this earlier and it slipped my mind, but, there's another side to that argument in terms of like the benefits of playing a particular sport year round, which has kind of become the norm for a lot of kids is, you'll be in a program for your high school. And then, all spring, summer, and fall, you're playing hoops with a traveling team and whatever it might be and working with other coaches or whatever it could, whatever the situation is, that in many aspects, a lot of folks would argue that that's not good either, right? Like, again, some of the better athletes are very well-rounded athletes, guys who not just play, don't just play basketball, but guys who are playing baseball, football, running track and field. They're, doing other extracurricular activities and for guys and girls, right? Coming through the high school ranks, like finding that well-roundedness as an athlete is incredibly important. Not even to mention social development, not only to mention academic development and all of those different things too. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack when you're looking at something like AAU basketball and how big it's become. You see some of the top athletes, NBA players who will say, a lot of them will say, listen, AAU was not good for us. Like it was not a good leader to what, we needed to do. Like in hindsight, I look back when I was young playing AAU basketball, I thought it was great, right? It was fun. I got to travel. I got to do all these great things. But the older I've gotten, I look back and I'm like, I don't know if that was good or bad for me. Like maybe I should have been doing something else, or maybe it would have been better to focus on a different sport in the summertime to give me a little bit more well-roundedness, or maybe those hangers on that you were talking about, maybe that wasn't so good to have them around. Where at the time when I'm 15 or 16, I didn't know any better. I was like, hey, cool, these guys are all around us. This is neat, right? So, a little bit better perspective the older you get and the further you step away from these things, you kind of realize what actually was happening. And again, you can kind of dictate whether it was good or bad based on what your experience was.
I want to jump on that and kind of ask you about, so as you went from Dover and you progress through the AAU ranks and you get to more competitive teams, right? Because by the time you're with the Reebok team that's based out of LA, you're playing really competitive games. That's kind of the springboard then for you to go to Michigan State, where you spend 5 years, in a Big Ten program, very intense environment. At least I think Coach Izzo's intense.
He is. You got it.
I'm curious, when you kind of reflect on your time in AAU, you mentioned, I don't know if it was good for me or bad for me. The truth is it was probably a little bit of both. But I'm curious about, did that, especially when you reflect on that AAU experience, did that improve your love for the game as a 15, 16-year-old kid? Or in retrospect, did it maybe zap it a little bit?
I would say 95% of my answer would be it improved my love for the game. I thought, again, I had unlimited energy at that age range. I just, you could go into the gym. You guys remember these days, you roll into the gym, you wouldn't even stretch. You just throw your shoes on and start playing, and you'd play all day, go sleep on like a crappy quality in bed, and then you're right back out there again the next day, no stretching, back and playing. Now I got to get to the gym 45 minutes early to stretch if I want to even be able to make it up and down the court. So, back then, just the love of playing basketball as much as humanly possible was a thrill. And so, yeah, absolutely. I loved it. And the exposure, not exposure in the sense that we just talked about, but just the exposure of traveling and meeting folks and playing against cool folks and being in different gyms around the country was absolutely awesome to somebody who loves basketball so much. It did take up a lot of time. I always say, what's one of the perils of playing AAU basketball? I remember my parents, I give them a lot of credit because they either let me go out, pretty much every weekend on my own, or they were traveling with us, as I mentioned earlier. And that's a big commitment for them. It's a big commitment to spend your entire spring, summer, and fall.
Letting you go to Belgium.
Like Well, yeah, I remember going into that trip, and the trip was covered. I didn't have to pay for it, so it was basically a free trip to go gallivant around France. We were in Paris. We went down and played in Nice and Monte Carlo and in the French Riviera. It was unbelievable. But I remember talking to my mom and dad and being like, I don't know, I don't think I want to go. I want to stay home and hang out with my buddies. And who knows what we were going to do?
Oh my God.
Go fishing or go to the mall or hang out at the food court. I don't know what I thought I was going to do at 15 years old. But I remember being really torn. Like, God, I've been traveling all summer. I just want to hang out with my buddies. And maybe play some Goldeneye or something, And it's like, it seemed like such a difficult process for me to choose to go to Europe.
That's what being a kid's all about.
Well, yeah, I think I told him no. I was like, I'm not going to travel over there. And then like a week before we were supposed to leave, I called back and I was like, if I can still get on the plane, I'll go. And they're like, yeah, no problem. And so that, to the question, yeah, it was not always as easy as it should have been. And it definitely wore on you. Like, that's a lot of basketball travel. And again, not to mention pressure. Like, as I got a little bit older and started playing on some of these bigger teams, you start seeing big time college coaches, recruiters, things like that. And you start to realize, oh boy, this isn't just, throwing on your reversible jersey and going to play basketball. Who cares if you win or lose? It's just good to be in the gym too. Boy, this could be my future. Like, if I impress the right folks, or if I, get enough points or enough rebounds or play hard enough, maybe someone will notice me and want to chat with me or say hi after the game. And then the recruiting process starts. So yeah, as a mid teenager, that pressure can stack up. But again, overarchingly, it was a ton of fun, and I didn't really focus on that stuff too much. Looking back now, I'm surprised that I didn't feel more pressure and more stress and all of that stuff. And again, I think it's just more the love of the game of basketball, and just being able to play as much as humanly possible was the trump card there.
Well, man, I so appreciate you giving us some time here today and talking about this. I know you gotta go, you gotta run here, so I'm gonna get you off the line here, and just want to say again, I appreciate the stories and listening to that different side of AAU. I saw it from across the gym, but had always wondered what it was like from a first person perspective. So it was great to hear some stories about that.
All right. Yeah. I appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much for the time.
Awesome.
You guys
Thanks,
have great
Jason.
perspective.
Yep. And Chucker,
Thanks, guys.
thanks as well.
Have a great one. Cheers, guys.
All right, guys.
Thanks.